Zit on it. That'd be great. Wouldn't it? Yep.
Right, good evening. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah. I'm the chair of Franklin District, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all here tonight, especially those from other districts. The Asian Hornet knows no boundaries, and nor should we. We're really fortunate to have Stuart here as a member of Grantham. He has put in a huge amount of time and effort researching, volunteering in Jersey, and helping to lead the response, not just in Lincolnshire, but nationally as well. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand it over to Stuart.
I'm no expert. That is a fact. So I don't know how up to speed everybody is with. So I imagine we've got a full range of people here. Some people might know a lot about the Hornet, the Asian Hornet, and some maybe not so. So the idea of today is really just to bring you up to speed with what is the Asian Hornet, why is it a threat to us and our environment. We're going to look at what's happened in Europe and this year particularly in the UK, and then we're going to look at combating the Hornet. So we're going to look at what they do in Jersey, which may or may not work for us, and then what we think we're going to have to do here in Lincolnshire. Okay, so the Asian Hornet, for those of you who don't know, basically it's an invasive species into Europe. It's not, it doesn't originate in Europe. It's Indonesia, I think some parts of India, China, places like that. It's a prestigious hunter, and they reckon, they've done some studies now, and they reckon that one Asian hornet nest will consume between 11 and 12 kilograms of insect in weight in 1 year. So if you put that into perspective, just think about that. That's 2 Asian hornets eat the equivalent of a bag of cement in insects. So I don't know how many of you lift many bags of cement. I've lifted far too many in my life, I can tell you, but that's a lot. Okay, so the problem really that we have in Europe is our insects don't really recognize it as a predator, and as you'll see later on, I've got some footage that we took. It's such an efficient predator, really. So that's what. So the first thing we have to think about is recognition. Okay, we've got to be able to, so is that not the greatest photo because it was taken on my phone in my kitchen last October, so that's a bit of a clue. But does anyone recognise what that is? European Hornet. Okay, not really any threat to our bees. Coexisted with us here for a couple of million years. That's more of a stock photo of a European Hornet. The one thing that I want to come on to is that in our battle against the Asian Hornet, what I think it will be criminal of us is to basically eradicate native species. So in our response to the Asian Hornet, we do need to consider a native environment. The European Hornet is kind of a gentle giant. I'm not saying they won't pick off the odd bee, they do. But just a little anecdote, just to demonstrate how they are quite so gentle. So about 10 years ago, we had one of our meetings here at Grantham, and a friend of Roy's called Swarming Norman came along. Now, I don't know if any of you knew Swarming Norman. I don't know how many beehives did he have, 1,000 or something? But, you know, yeah, at least. He was a bit of a bee guru, and unbeknown to me, who was sat next to him, he was a bit of a hornet guru. So we were all sat around like this, and I was sat next to him, and on his lap he had an ice, like a Wool's ice cream tub, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to see my hornets?" So I kind of looked in and thought, "Oh my God, what's a strange bloke? What's he talking about?" And he took the lid off, and to my horror, in this Wool's ice cream tub were about a dozen of the biggest things I'd ever seen in my life. So he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Stu, don't worry." He said, "I've fed them up before I came here. I put a load of honey in there and they've eaten it all." He said, they'll be like stuffed pigs. They're not going to get up and fly. They'll be all right." And to my horror, He then put his hand into the tub, and they all started crawling all over his hand and up his arm. And while we had our meeting, he literally spent. Do you remember that, Catherine? Yeah. They literally spent about 15 minutes of the meeting crawling all over him. He offered me some, I declined. And just to prove that I'm not BSing, that's one of Norman's happy hornets on his hand. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is destroy these guys. Okay, this is the kitty that we're bothered about. Okay, so very different, because most members of the public don't recognise a bee from a wasp. European hornet, Asian hornet. The overwhelming impression when you see them is that they're just black. Now, a lot of people, you know, they say, oh yeah, they've got yellow legs and they've got a little bit of yellow on the back abdomen. When you see them flying around, honestly, the impression that you get is they're just really black. They're ever so distinctive. And when they fly, unlike our bees that kind of always on a mission and they're kind of down like that and fly, the hornets, I think it's because they're so predatory, they sort of fly like right up like that. They're sort of looking. So they have a very distinctive flight pattern. And that will give you just an indication of size. This is a photo I took over in Jersey. There's a wasp in the foreground, which makes it look bigger anyway. And you can see there's actually 3 varying sizes of hornet. But that will give you an idea if you look at that beast there, quite big. They're not quite as big as European hornet. European hornet's slightly bigger. Interestingly, there were most definitely different sizes of hornet, and they don't know if they grow to that, or certainly when I was over there, they hadn't worked out if they grow to that size, or some of them are smaller. The ones that are hunting for insects generally tended to be the larger ones, and the ones that were foraging tended to be slightly smaller. And I think that's because the larger ones can carry their prey back to the nest more efficiently. And again, another photo. So you can all recognise an Asian hornet from a European hornet now, yeah? Good. Just a few basic sort of facts and figures. How they know, I don't know, but common myth has it that a single hornet got into France in a shipment of pottery. How they know, I don't know, because it must have flown out of the pottery and gone on its merry way. But the first Asian hornet was detected in 2004 in France. Last year in France, there were 550,000 nests. That equates to 1 nest per every 1 square kilometre in France. So if you're a beekeeper, there is almost certainly numerous hornet nests within hunting distance of your apiary. Similar sort of thing in Galicia in Spain. What happened in Spain is very typical of the Asian hornet in that every year it expands tenfold. And we'll come on to explain why that's the case. So they found a couple of nests. The next year there were about 20. The year after that, they had about 200. Then they had about 2,000. Then they had about 20,000. It literally expanded that quickly. Within a space of 4 or 5 years, they went from never having seen a hornet to having about 20,000 nests. Jersey's had a problem now for quite a while. This year in Jersey, we'll come and talk about them, in an island 5 miles by 9 miles. This year, I think they found about 230 nests, and they caught over 450 queens in the spring. So, worrying. Belgium's fairly typical to us here. In terms, it's similar sort of climate. In 2020, they found 35 nests, and last year they found 3,000. Okay, so the spread is quite alarming. Until last year, there was only a few nests being found in the UK, probably about 15, 16 nests, something like that. I think maybe, and they reckon they're from 11 queens. So maybe some of the nests were primary and secondary, which I'll come on to explain. And last year, there was only actually 1 nest detected. We'll come on to what's happening this year shortly. In order to understand the Asian hornet, what effect and when it has the effect on our bees, and to develop a strategy to cope with it. We all just need to understand the life cycle of the Asian hornet, because it's a bit different to what we're used to as beekeepers. Okay, so the best way to start is at this time of year, back end of the summer, early autumn. That's when the nests are their largest. I've heard varying reports about what they reckon are the numbers in a nest, but it's probably like 1,500. In Jersey, they reckon there are about 2,000, but I've heard various people saying it's about 1,500 in a nest. The nests in France are typically 2 to 3 foot diameter. Average nest probably 2 foot. The ones that have been found in the UK have probably been about 18 inches diameter, and I think that's probably maybe just get a brood cycle or two less because spring comes a bit later in the UK. But at this time of the year, the nest is at its biggest. That's when there's the most hornets in that nest. Okay. And at the back end of the summer and the early autumn, the nest, they transfer from having made worker hornets all year long to making what they call sexuals, which are drones and queens to us. Okay. And a typical Asian hornet nest can produce up to 1,000 sexuals. Okay. Now I got shot down by someone about a week or two ago because I mentioned that they threw out about 200 queens, and there was a French guy, and he was like, "No, you're having a laugh, aren't you? It was way more than 200." So I don't know exactly, but they start making sexuals at this time of year. Okay, it's a queen on the left, that's a worker, and the one on the right is a drone. Yeah, so yeah, different to bees. So the nest won't survive the year. They stop making workers, that nest is going to die out. Okay, and the nest will become prone to wind and rain and all the rest of it. So that nest is going to die out. But the mated queens, at some point in the autumn, mid-latter point of the autumn, they will leave the nest and they'll go off to find their merry way, and they will hibernate. Okay? So it's only the mated queens that survive and go into winter. I think this was a photo from Germany, so like under a tree bark or something like that, they'll find somewhere sheltered to hibernate. That's another couple. They again pull back some tree bark. There's a couple of Asian hornet queens. In the spring, once the temperature is constantly over about 12 degrees C, seems to be when they come out of hibernation. And for the first 10 to 12 weeks of their life, the queen will be like a single parent. So she's going to fly around, get her strength up, feed herself up after winter hibernation, and she'll start building a little primary nest. It'll start off really quite small. She'll lay a small number of workers. She'll be going out to hunt insects to feed them because they need to be fed protein. And that primary nest will grow a little bit. Primary nests, they seem to like man-made structures, so they're like porches, garden sheds, things like that. They generally make the primary nests a bit lower down. I guess that's because if they're higher up, they're more vulnerable to the elements because they're much smaller. At some point, when that gets large enough, the colony will migrate relatively close by, maybe in like 100 meters, and they'll start building a secondary nest. So a lot of the workers will leave, start building a secondary nest, and when that's sufficient enough for the queen, her and the remaining entourage will leave, and they go to a secondary nest, which they generally build relatively high up in trees. Now, what I heard something last week, there's a guy called Andrew Durham who's kind of a bit like he's a real expert on the Asian hornet, and he said what they've noticed as it's come into northern France is the height of the nest has been coming down a bit, and they think that is just the Asian hornet evolving to a slightly more windy, temperamental climate than in southern France. Okay, so some of the nests have in places like Brittany and Normandy and the Pas-de-Calais have been slightly lower down, but you know, in southwest France, they were building the nest 10 meters up, but they reckon that's a lot lower in our plant. Yeah. When would you expect to develop? So They generally reckon up to the end of May, it's the queens flying around on their own. So it's probably sometime after that. It's probably sometime in June. Okay, and then that nest will grow, and that will expand through the year. Okay. So if you think about it, why it affects our bees is in terms of the volume of food that they have to get to feed that nest. It's at its absolute maximum in late August and September. In September, they've probably got to feed 1,000 sexuals, nice rich diet, okay? And that is the time of year when our bees are starting to wind down for the winter, okay? So the bees that are born, or hatched, shall I say, into our hives at that time of year, they're our winter bees. They're the bees that are going to get that colony through the winter. And that is the time of maximum predation by Asian hornets. So in France, typically, they're making a nuisance of themselves from late July. And that increases to probably September being, well, probably the worst time. But that's the time of year that our colonies can't really cope with having 1,000 bees every week picked off, which is kind of what happens, okay? So yes, some colonies do get overrun in the event of way too many hornets, but typically what happens is colonies get irreparably weakened and they don't survive winter. And it shouldn't be underestimated the amount of stress that it puts a colony under, seeing the strange big black insects out the front of the hive constantly picking all their friends off, and it puts the colony under a lot of stress. Okay. Now I've got some footage to show you which is better, but what they tend, they fly really. I don't know if you've seen a European hornet checking a hive out. I've got hornets in my apiary, European hornets this year, and they sort of dart in and out, and they're checking everything out. The European hornet's just really smooth, and they come in and they'll sort of patrol in front of the hive, and then they'll grab a bee and off they go. And in some cases, there's dozens of them just coming and going all day long. Okay, so the effect it has on the bees is to stress. Bees generally tend to convert quite a few more bees to guard bees, and they tend to clump a bit at the front of the hive, but don't stop them all getting picked off. And you shouldn't really consider an Asian hornet as a specialist bee predator. I reckon in a country area, probably 30% of their diet is bees. You know, they'll take anything from spiders to, the only thing they're sort of bothered about is European hornets. They don't like European hornets. In an urban area, in some urban areas of France, they reckon bees will make up 70% of the diet, and that's probably because there's less insects. So in the UK, I'm just going to whiz through this really because it's kind of out of date. It's what happened previously. So we had there was a few nests dotted around. That's the number of nests over a period of about 7 years. Only really one nest found last year, which was in Rayleigh in Essex, which was destroyed. That was the nest. It was the DNA test every nest, and all of the nests, they can tell that they haven't come from Asia. They've come from the French variant, so they can tell that. And then this year happened. So one, and this is out of date now. But so one nest found last year. This, as of the 9th of September, 42 nests. As of today, it's 45. Most of those nests have been found in Kent and the southeast. There's been a few over in Hampshire, and today we found a positive sighting in Hull, near the docks. Again, none of the, now this is, I don't know if this is entirely accurate as of what's happened over the last week or so, but as of about a week and a half ago, none of the nests discovered were related to anything that's been found in the UK before. They've come from France. Okay, so they appear to have come from France, and they're not an Asian variant. Why are there so many here now? Okay, well, last year was what's called a surge year. Okay, the previous year in France there was about 250,000 nests. Last year was about 550,000. The reason for that was really climate. So the winter of 21 to 22 was a really, really mild winter in France. There was very little frost. Some areas had no frost all winter. So loads more hibernating queens survived their hibernation. Okay. That was then followed by the spring got away under early, really good weather. It was just perfect. It's not the summer weather, it's the weather in the winter and the spring that really determines how many hornets to get in France every year. And last year was just perfect conditions for them. Okay. Areas like Normandy and the Pas-de-Calais area, you know, had more than double the previous year. And so really, I think what we're seeing in the UK and the southeast this year is it's just an overspill from France. And how do they get here? They just fly. So there's a lot of transit across the channel, so it might be that some of them hitch a lift. But when I was in Jersey, I said to them, how do they get here? And they said, oh, they just fly over from France. I was like, well, how far are you from France? They said 15 miles. I thought, blimey, what? They come across? Oh, yeah. And I said, well, are they in Guernsey as well? He said, yeah, they're in Guernsey, but there's not quite as many. I said, well, how far's Guernsey? It was like 25 miles. When I was flying back, looking over the channel, it kind of dawned on me that Dover-Calais is only 21 miles. So they're pretty sure they just fly over. Don't know how many of them don't make it, but enough of them do.
We also had a period of very strong southerly winds.
Yeah.
I know they hit Jersey big time at that point.
Mm. Yeah, that's what they said. Yeah, you're correct. Sorry, gone past 2. So the bad news for the UK, if we just go back to the Asian hornet's life cycle, one thing I probably should have mentioned was all these queens go out and hibernate, and they reckoned that in Jersey, they reckon 4 or 5% of them survived, so on average, survived an average winter. And that doesn't sound very much, but if they're throwing 200 queens out, it's a lot. If, like Mr. Frenchman who corrected me last week was concerned and said, no, they might throw 400 or 500 queens out, it's even more. Okay, so the upshot is, broadly speaking, for every nest you miss this year, you get 10 the following year. Okay. What we don't know is whether they'll catch all the nests, get all the hornets this year or not. Probably unlikely. So if they don't, we'll have a resident population plus any that choose to fly over the channel next year. So I think it's likely that the hornet incursion into the south is going to be an annual problem. Milder winters means more hornets. And then the other night, I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, what's the bad news for Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire? So Asian hornet nests are being found in North London. The furthest north is Hackney. That's 100 miles from Lincolnshire. If we assume the worst and think these queens only came over this year, the French coast to the English coast is 21 miles. And I measured it on Google Earth the other night. The English coast to North London, as the crow flies, or as the hornet flies, is 60 miles. So that's 81 miles from the nearest French beach to Hackney, where they found a nest. We're only 100 miles away from Hackney, by road, actually. So just think about that.
Assuming that they're first generation.
That's assuming that they are first generation French queens that came over. But the Asian hornet spread in France has been at something like 60 to 80 kilometers a year. So they clearly do fly a long way, further than you would give them credit for. So if they are first generation queens that are being found in London, they've flown an awful lot more than just over the channel. I'm not an expert, I don't know. I was just kind of doing the maths. So, it's just a splatter over the south. Yeah, there is a map which I printed off, but because they did the map 2 weeks ago, it's completely out of date. So there's just a splatter of nests. Particularly, there's a lot around Folkestone, Dover. You know, certainly near the Kent coast, there's a concentration. So I first got interested about 4 or 5 years ago in the hornet, and there was an appeal put out by the Jersey beekeepers because they were getting overrun. And my work situation had just changed that autumn, and I had a bit of spare time on my hands. So I thought, for the first time, I'll actually do some good. I'll go and volunteer somewhere. So I made contact with them. Grantham District kindly paid for my airfare. Jersey put me up with a couple of beekeepers, so I didn't have to pay for any accommodation. And that was really good because the couple I stayed with, the husband was a very jovial Austrian who had lived in Jersey for about 30 years. He was very proud of his Austrian heritage and even more proud of his Austrian beer, which he plied me with copious amounts every night. So we had a great time. So the only thing I had to pay for was the Hornet mobile, which I had to hire fairly cheaply. So I was just going to recap sort of how Jersey deal with it, okay? Because they've developed like the Jersey method for destroying nests, which at the front end of the incursion, as it comes to Lincolnshire, may be useful to us. But you need to understand it anyway. So in Jersey, they have an Asian Hornet team. They have I doubt it'll happen here, but they have a full-time guy called Alistair Christie, who's employed by the states of Jersey, and he acts as the Asian Hornet coordinator. So he takes in all the sightings, divvies out, going out, putting bait stations out to try and find if they've got hornets, etc., etc. And then they divvy up the work in searching for and destroying the nests. Okay, and they meet when I was there anyway. They met once a week. That was all the ongoing hornet hunts just at the time that I was there. It's quite a few for 1 week, and they've got 3 times as many now. So they basically coordinate between a little volunteer army that they've got. Some people literally spend their whole summer doing nothing but hornet hunting. Some people might give up 1 day every month. Some people maybe one day in a year. But largely it's a volunteer sort of army that have. The hornet isn't born with a dot on its back. We'll come to that. And everyone in the Asian Hornet team gets a hornet hunting pack, which is basically 2-way radio, compass, queen catcher, marker pens. They use a thing called Satira, which is it's a very sweet food source for them that they find irresistible. You can make a lot cheaper your own baits up. And interestingly, we'll come to this. This was one of the things we all got quite excited about. Does anyone know what that is? I think it's something from fly fishing, actually. Yeah. We'll come to that. I'll keep you wondering what that's for. But what they explained it for us, we got quite excited and we couldn't wait to give that a go. So I'll show you. So within half a day, we were out with one of their beekeepers, and they have a load of these bait stations out. So a sighting will come in, a member of the public will send a photo in, Alistair will look at it. Yep, that's a positive hornet sighting, and he'll task someone in the area. They'll go and put a load of these out. They're open to allow the hornets to fly in and out, okay, because they want to get the hornets to establish that as a food source. Once they establish that as a food source, they'll just keep coming back to it all day long. So they'll leave those out for a few days, go and check them after a few days, and every couple of minutes a hornet will be coming in and out, and other things, wasps, butterflies, flies, hoverflies, all the rest of it. And there's a bunch of them. They generally scrunch up a bit of cotton wool or tissue in the bottom. Just it stops it evaporating. And there's another reason which I'll explain shortly. You can see they're having a bit of a
Keep it
gulp
so
there.
that some of the tissue is drier than the rest.
So
right? Because otherwise,
we were all stood round this thing watching these hornets, and Bob says, "Watch out! Here comes one!" And it sort of came in and flew, and I was like, "Oh my lord!" And it suddenly there were like 6 strange people around this bait that had been flying in and out of for a couple of days. So I kind of thought, well, that's a bit strange. What are they here? And had a bit of a look at us and went and think. And at that point, I have to say, I thought to myself, Stuart, what the did you think this was a good idea for? Because I was horrified. I was like, oh my lord, these great big furry things with their legs hanging out, looking. I was like, oh my lord. We were all, and the 5 guys who were there was me, the 2 B inspectors from Northern Ireland and 3 B inspectors from Scotland. And all of us kind of took a step back, even the B inspectors. So that was something. So once they've got hornets coming in and out of bait stations, the idea is, in Jersey anyway, is a hornet is more valuable alive than dead. Because if you just kill a worker hornet, there's another 1,500 of them. You're not really, what you need to do is kill the nest. So what they do is they just use a simple queen catcher that we would use, yeah. And these hornets, they were never really afraid of anything. They're kind of an apex predator. So you can just catch them very easy and you mark them. Now, the reason you mark them is there'll be a number of hornets coming in and out of that bait station. You'd never know which one's which. What they do over there is they mark 2 hornets, okay, and then they let them fly off. Now, one of the other reasons they put things in the bottom for the hornets to land on and tissue is they don't want the hornets to kind of get the stuff all over them, because what they'll do is, as that hornet flies away from the bait station, you'll start your stopwatch and you watch the direction that it flies, and that's where your compass comes in. And and they're so big and black that you can probably see them flying for 50, 60 yards, maybe more. So you know the direction that hornet is flying away, and you're timing it. And then what you're doing is you're waiting for your hornet that you've marked to come back. Okay. So it will go to the nest, deposit its load just like our bees, and it will just come straight back. And what they worked out is for every minute they're away from the hive, the nest is probably 100 meters. Okay. So when we started on this day, they'd got so far already with this hunt, and you maybe let them fly 3, 4, 5 times until you get an average, because sometimes it's a bit different. And that's why they don't want the hornets smothered in nectar, because what they'll do is they'll fly up into a tree and they'll clean themselves, and then they'll go back to the hive. So it skews your readings, and you'll get unrealistic readings of where that nest is. Okay, so we were getting readings of about 4.5, 5 minutes. That meant it's 450, 500 meters away. Okay, and once you've got that consistent reading over 4 or 5 measurements, you then go in the direction that the hornet's flown, and you'll probably set another bait station up maybe 200 or 300 meters away, because sometimes they might follow the flight path might not be in a straight line. They might follow a contour or a valley or a hedgerow or something like that. So, and what you do is you incrementally just move closer to the nest. That's one getting marked, gives you an indication in comparison, like with a queen bee. They're quite big, really. Bigger than a queen bee. So this particular hornet hunt, we ended up, when you get to within like about 100 meters of the hive, the readings just go out the window. They don't really mean anything. So it just comes down to a manual search, and you have to go around. So we were looking around, and up hidden in the nest, we found a nest. And I think it was actually the bee inspector from Ireland who found that. That nest was in someone's front garden, and they'd been driving in and out of their drive and living in their garden all summer and hadn't noticed that nest. And it was the third week in September. When we pointed it out to them, they were completely shocked that it was there. But so it's easy to miss, even when you're there every day. They're kind of up in the canopy, they blend in quite well. That's it, sort of closer. And then a couple of days after they find it, the nest was being destroyed. At this point, you have to stand back a bit. I mean, they weren't at that height, they weren't aggressive to us, but I think there have been instances when sort of at close distance to the nest, they can be very, very aggressive, okay? Just before we were there, one of the, they put a hard hat on underneath their hood. And I think about what they were doing at that time, because they were still finding out more about them. They were going up in a basket, clearing all the foliage, all the hornets come out and go completely crackers. Anyway, once the foliage is cleared, they go down, let the hornets die back and go, lose their temper, go back into the nest, and then they would go up and bag it and take it and put it in a freezer so they could dissect the nest, so they could kind of understand, because they were still in the earlier days of finding out what was going on. But unfortunately, there'd been an incident about 2 weeks earlier where in the rush at the end of the day, one of the guys had forgot to put his hard hat under his hat, and they all came and fuzzed up at him when he was in the man basket. And he 6mm stings, they actually got through these moon suits, and they got him about 6, 7, 8 times in his head. He collapsed and ended up for a few days in hospital. So at that time, they'd changed their protocol and they were just killing them in this way. Interestingly, I heard there was a special briefing about a week ago by this Andrew guy who's a real expert, and he said some Korean guys. Have you ever seen do you remember the old Japanese thing where they did crazy things and people would beat? Can you remember what it was called? Yeah, it was like about 20 years ago. Okay, so I got visions of this, that these crazy Korean guys had decided to find out at what distance hornets started getting aggressive to the nest. So they got these lunatic suicide volunteers, and they would basically go up to the nest and start jumping around and making vibrations. And then when the hornets came, they just basically scarpered and ran. And they worked out, I think, that within 5 meters, you're really, really in, trouble. But it sounded a bit grim what they were.
What is happening there? Is he cutting them?
No, what he's doing is, yeah, no, I think she's just directing him. So it's like a big lance with, and they put a cartridge in the end of it. They put that into the nest, and then there's a trigger at the bottom of the lance.
Oh, they're injecting
yeah,
the phone.
yeah. And it's like a cartridge that they fired into the nest. Yeah, this nest they had to put 3 cartridges in. I think it's a powder and it explodes. Yeah. Anyway, that's what they were, and this was 4 years ago, so that's what they were doing then. And then really we were off various places around where we had a day. So you use anything to put a bait station up, someone's garden ornament. They reported the hornet, they can have the bait station in their garden. Yeah. This is an interesting one. So after we'd been there for about 3 days, they decided we were suitably equipped to go off and do our own hornet hunt. So okay, so they started us at a lovely spot overlooking. We were on some high ground overlooking the coast. It was lovely, and there was an apiary nearby that up until these hives were getting hammered by hornets, and the beekeeper reported them. They did the hornet hunt, destroyed the nest, and at that time it was the biggest nest they had in Jersey that year. I reckon it was huge. The beekeeper rang up about 3 days after the nest had been killed, saying, well, the hornets are still here. So they were obviously being hunted by 2 nests. So they tasked us with, and they reckon these hives were getting hammered, which again, if you consider that time of year, it's not great. So you have to, I'll play it again. You see how steady they fly? Now, if you missed it, that's it. It's got to be. Okay. And then it will take it off to a tree and trim it up. So they basically cut the head, abdomen, wings and legs off and just take the thorax back to the nest. I'll play it again. They generally often seem to get the bees. They were getting the bees coming back, not flying out. So it's going to get a bee over this side. Let's go, got it. Now this beekeeper had decided to do some trapping in his apiary, and he had, you know, those bottle things that were hanging in the trees. He'd used something similar to that. It was a bit indiscriminate, really, which we'll come on to. And we were starting. We were starting about 9 o'clock in the morning. As you can see, the weather wasn't great. The hornets weren't bothered. They'll stop flying. Oh, that, yeah. That's it, hanging upside down, doing its butcher's job. Yeah, not very pleasant. Forgot where I was now. Anyway. Oh yeah, he got his bait station set up, and he had about a dozen of them, and they were jam-packed full to the top with hornets. There must have been 60 hornets in every one, and there were still, at that time in the morning, there were probably 10 or 12 hornets constantly coming in and hawking off that apiary. And we were counting them. Where we found the nest was about 500 meters away, so I reckon that's 5 minutes. A little bit, I don't know. We thought the hornets would probably take, each individual hornet was probably taking 50, 60, 70 bees a day for one hornet. So we followed them on the line. So they were flying off. There's like a valley down there with a road and some high ground up here, and they were flying in that direction. So again, following the procedure, we just went over and set up a bit closer to that church where we set up a bait station there. That's Alistair Christie from Jersey looking on his iPad using Google Earth, trying to plot where they were going. We were having really difficulty because what they were doing, we were on slightly high ground, and they were flying down, and then we could see them go up again. But because they're dark, there was dark green foliage, we were just losing on all this foliage. Thought, well, how on earth are we gonna? We can't get where they're going from here. So then we thought back to our initial induction and our fly fishing streamer. So you have to make sure you get a big hornet. A bit of super glue, and we glued this streamer on its back. And we all got excited and decided to give it a go. So anyway, we let it out, and the hornet to start with didn't seem to want to fly. We thought, well, I'm not surprised. And then it got going, and it dropped. And just before it got to the ground, it got its strength up, and up it went. And it flew across the valley, and we could see it the whole way into the trees where it went. So that's why sometimes, if that's how strong they are, you carry it. And it was just like this thing. The interesting thing is the hornet came back, because they will. You know, they're coming back to a food source. And when it came back, its streamer was half as long. So all the mates in the nest obviously decided, well, I don't like the look of this. We're going to trim some of it off for it. And it went back. And when it came back, there was only much less of it back. So her friends were doing her every time she went back. It was smaller when she came back. We got as far as someone's back garden, and some of the back gardens in Jersey are a bit spectacular, I have to say. But we just we were like, I can't find the bloody thing. This is a nightmare. We're looking around everywhere. Of course, we're on our own without one of the people from Jersey at this point. And this lady turned up, Jane, who's one of the hornet hunter extraordinaires from Jersey. And she walks on, she says, how guys, how you doing? And we're all leant against this tree. Well, we don't know. And she just looked up and she says, oh, there it is. I kid you not. And there it was above us. Again, in someone's back garden in the 3rd week of September. This is just an example early on some of the hornet hunts. So on my last day, I think all the bee inspectors had gone home, so I was just there on my own, and they'd had a report of a hornet somewhere on the interior of the island, and so I just went up and set a whole load of bait stations up, and that's a bit of a boring job really, because you're setting them up for the first time and you don't know if any hornets are going to come. And I was there all day, well, not all day, but I was there a long time. And I just about gave up. I went and spoke to a few locals and had a good chat and everything. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I thought, I'm giving up now, you know. And so I spoke to Jane. She says, oh, don't worry, you've been there since like 9 o'clock, you know, it's obviously. So I'd had about 6 or 7 bait stations out. So I went round and got them all. And I got to the last bait station. I was literally packing everything away in the car, and turned round to empty the bait and chuck it away. And there was an Asian hornet in there. It was my last day, and this is anyway. So basically, I relayed all the information to them, and they were plotting roughly where it was. And there's just an example of how these are from different bait stations where they're sort of just getting a rough idea, so they know roughly where to find. And they found that about a week after I left. So I think that's the nest there where they found. Interestingly, that one, I was getting readings of between 12.5 and 15 minutes. And I reckon that's on the absolute limit of what they might fly. So it's probably like 1.5 kilometers or something like that. So they don't fly probably anywhere near as far as what our bees do. I brought something with me, didn't I? There. So these are just my thoughts and the thoughts of a couple of us at LBKA, really, is and this is no criticism of the MBU at all. They're doing an amazing job, absolutely working their tails off down in, and of course they were working on the assumption that last year there was only 1 nest. Well, obviously now there's probably going to be like 50, 60. Okay. So I think we should base our preparations on the worst case. That's what I think. And that it's only a matter of time before they reach Lincolnshire. If we get an established population in the southeast, it's 10-to-1 ratio, we're going to have a problem. So I think we need to be prepared, because, and this is why I say there's absolutely no criticism of the MBU. If you take a step back with hindsight, if they had, if certain preparations had been carried out this spring, we might have had half the number of hornets this year. I'll come to that. I think it's really important to be realistic, given where we are, and the majority of the nests are in the southeast. By the time they get to Lincolnshire or Nottinghamshire, the MBU are almost certainly going to be overrun. At the minute, they're in what they call eradication phase. So they find a nest, it's eradicated. At the point at which they get overrun, the MBU will probably go back to their day job, which is finding foul brood, and we're going to be on our own. So that's the likely scenario if we start getting the number of nests in this area that they've had in the southwest. There might be thousands following the ones that are coming. Yeah. So the main defences, based on the experience in France, I think, is a county-wide selective spring trapping of Asian hornet queens. In Jersey this year, they spring trapped something like, I can't remember the exact number, but it's over 450 queens in a little island. Those would all have gone on to make a viable nest. Okay. France recommend, in France, they recommend a minimum of 2 traps per apiary, but not in your apiary. You don't want to attract hornets into your apiary. Okay. Once Asian hornets are predating in your apiary, you then can use selective traps in your apiary, and there would be a permanent feature. Okay. There's a lot of discussion going on, really, between some people whether you should just trap all year. And I asked Andrew Dunn a question that last week. He said, well, the ecological carnage that you'll create by trapping all year is going to be horrendous. But it isn't if you use selective traps as opposed to indiscriminate traps. Bait stations are needed if nests are to be tracked and destroyed. It may only be viable to track and destroy nests at the front end of the incursion in order to just keep the numbers down for a year or two. But if we start seeing hundreds of nests, a volunteer army here is just not going to cope with that. There are other things, electric hearts that they position, and I'm not going to go into all this because there's loads of things the French beekeepers have done. There's electric hearts that they position to try and ping the Asian hornets as they come in to cut the numbers down, but the bees can get through them and things like that. There's a thing called a muselier, which is like a wire sleeve on the front of the hive that sort of just keeps the hornets slightly further away. A lot of expense in all these things as well. What is a selective trap? Well, this is one. So I've been talking to a couple of suppliers because they've invented the wheel in France, and there's a couple of versions. This is one from a company called Garde Apis. So you can hang that in a tree. What you would do with any of the selective traps is put some sort of bait station out for, say, a week or so to actually get hornets to recognize the food source, and then you replace it with a selective trap. Now that trap the hole is too small for a European hornet to get in. But all the holes around the side are big enough for anything smaller than an Asian hornet that gets in there to get out. But the Asians can't get out. So it only catches Asian hornets. Pardon? You would have to make the bait. Yeah. You've got to attract them in there. Yeah. And the bait is bigger. It's more chunky. Can't get in. So 5.5 mil hole is what an Asian hornet can get through. Yeah, apparently so. That's what they say. And certainly the spring queens. So the queens are going to come out of hibernation in the spring. So at the very least, these want to be out until the end of May. If you catch an Asian hornet in this country up to the end of May, it's almost certainly going to be a queen. So every queen you catch, you save 1 nest this year, but it's not. You save 10 nests the year after, and you've saved 100 nests in 2 years' time, and you've maybe saved, if you go on. So you're not just saving 1 nest, killing 1 nest.
I can describe that then makes a lot of sense. The ones that Spawn are advertising look like a plastic cup with a clever lid on. But
They're indiscriminate. I haven't looked at them, but you have to be really careful. Yeah, they do. Yeah. And what they're doing is, I've seen on some things where they'll go and they'll have to open the trap every so often to let the European hornets out. It's just that retail is probably £19.50, but we, through the association of companies, we can bulk buy them. He's only sent me the details today. I haven't read his email, but less. there's another one, and that someone's sending me, and I haven't got it yet. Basically, 'cause it is the guy who sells them over here. All these have been developed in France, basically. So with this one, there's a guy called Christophe Gaspard, who's a French beekeeper from the southwest somewhere, Gloucester, I can't remember exactly. And you buy this bit of kit here on both sides, which is a similar price to this, but you need a box for it to go into. The benefit of this one is you can fit it into a much bigger box. So you can probably like leave that out for a month, 2 months before you have to empty it. So yeah, I think once the bait's in there, they're attracted to it, and I think the fact that there are hornets in there attracts them as well. Again, he sent me all the instructions about how you do it, and this guy is basically saying, you know, what both of these suppliers are saying is, if you trap enough, what they're finding in France is you can put a serious dent in the Asian hornet population. And in his talk last week, Andrew Durham had compared a couple of what they call them departments, we call them counties, a couple of departments in France. And he quoted a particular department that was really into trapping. And last year they were getting 5,000 nests in their department, which sounds horrific, but the department next door was getting like 8,500, 9,000 nests, and they didn't have such an effective trapping thing. So I think from this spring, I think we need to be trapping before they're here, because you catch the ones as they arrive.
So if you're going to say you trap it, how far from your apiary?
Yeah, I would recommend everyone. It's on YouTube. Andrew Durham did two talks last week on consecutive nights. I don't know did you watch them? So it was all the Asian Hornet coordinators and secretaries or something got invited to that thing, but they're probably, and they're really, really, it's so informative. It answers all your questions. Basically, you've got to be, if you're setting traps, you want the traps, how does it work? Is it upwind or downwind? You don't want the trap to be blowing its scent towards your apiary. Yeah, the hornets will find your apiary through scent. So you want the wind to be coming that way, and the hornets come to that before your apiary. So the position, he was suggesting positioning some, when you're doing traps, if you're leaving them out, to say, put the first trap 600 meters away and the second trap 300, 350 meters away. You want them within hunting distance, but once they're in your apiary and they're hammering your hives, then you might as well have them in your apiary. But
is there any data on what other insects that was in the bad light?
Not that I'm aware. I mean, it's really early days. You know, this has all been going on. It's been a bit hectic, but in France. I don't think there's been any significant selective trapping done in any consequence in this country.
The presentations I've just watched were accompanied with a couple of other emails. One of those was a gentleman making an plastic coat bottle.
Yeah.
Which is, again, we've got a rural affairs department here. But he actually got a separator within the trap to stop the bycatch getting into the boat. Therefore, they can escape.
I mean, there's not many insects in the UK I've seen that are bigger than an Asian hornet, or even the same size, I think is the answer.
The reason I brought it is that I think when we start doing this, we could build on as species and then we get back.
Which is why I'm trying to hammer home. You know, you see horror stories on the internet, don't you? There was someone who in Kent last week who was proudly demonstrating his Coke bottle that was jam-packed full of European hornets, and I'm thinking, well, you know, these are our bees live with those. That they're not a problem. So we're right I think, to be really ecologically sensitive, sympathetic, and that's the best that I can find at the minute. And these ones, and the French guy who sells these is absolutely adamant that just about everything else gets out, or everything else gets out, and European hornets don't get in. Yeah. Well, interesting. With the instructions of this, it says that you can kindly take the Asian hornet and put it in your freezer. So that. Yeah. Yeah. I think they took. Yeah. Yeah. Clearly, that is. If I think as a spring trap, that looks great. Going to catch a hornet, queen or two. A big box, he's going to catch a lot. That, from what I saw in Jersey, that guy in that apiary would have had to have had about a dozen of those and probably emptied them every couple of days. So when I saw that, I was thinking, well, yeah, it looks really good, but it might fill up a bit quick. I can't tell anyone what to do. But
No, just the whole thing in the freezer.
well, the whole point of catching them is to prevent them from damaging the environment.
You have to have a special license to be able to release them.
Yeah, they're yeah. That's going out the window. There's so many hornets down in Kent that they're starting to rely on volunteers who are catching and releasing and all the rest of it. It's a bit of a. By the time it comes to us, that's one of them just hanging up. This is just my ideas. It's not saying this is the policies, isn't. These are just my ideas, really. I think we need to carry out selective trapping from this spring by every member in Lincolnshire and in Nottinghamshire. Possibly, yeah. Obviously, if we catch one, it is reportable anyway at this stage. In Lincolnshire, we have supposedly 450 active members, and there's talk of Stamford joining that have got 100. Yeah, you have to report it because we're in the eradication phase. This year we are, hopefully. If every member had 2 of these, we'd have 1,000 traps out in Lincolnshire. The problem we've got is getting every member to actually do it. And that's a problem. Anyone. Yeah. I'd like 15,000 residents in Grantham to have these out. It's not limited to beekeepers. Anyone that you can persuade, it is. We can bulk buy them.
I don't think you quite got around to how far you mentioned about the,
if you're selectively spring trapping, it don't really matter. You're trying to stop them in your area. If you're trying to stop them get into your apiary, then hunting distance is probably 1 kilometre. So you probably want traps out 600 metres, 300 to 600 metres from your apiary, if you're protecting your own apiary. But kind of what we're trying to stop and do is get into Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire anyway, isn't it? I would consider personally, I can't see any argument, as long as they're selective, I can't see any good reason not to selectively trap year round. As an association, we can't afford to buy 2 traps, because I've done the maths. If we bought every member 2 of these traps, it costs £18,000. So we can't do that. No. No, not yet. I mean, this has all happened in the last few weeks. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Like, how many hives have you got, Donya? What's the value of equipment that you have got to look after your bees? 15 hives, equipment, spinner. Right. 20 quid. What I'm saying is things like this or your other one, I think we should consider as being standard beekeeping equipment. It's as important as your hive tool, as your smoker, and it's more important than your varroa treatment that you probably spend 10, 15 quid on per hive or whatever.
Are you going to mention the app in the phone?
Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end. Initial sightings, well, are we going to are we just not going to bother, or are we going to try and track and destroy? Probably only viable to track and destroy when we've got manageable numbers, because there's only going to be us doing it. Can't, everyone's, it's just. Yes. Yeah. But if the MBU will get overrun within a year, I'm sure each district is going to get overrun, isn't it? I'm saying in the long term, track and destroy is not a policy. Personally, if I had hornets in my apiary, I would track them and I'd pay the 100 quid or 80 quid or whatever it is, and I'd have them killed because I want to protect my bees. That's my personal choice. But as a county-wide policy, we can't be thinking, well, we're going to find 1,000, 1,500 nests this year. Just not viable. So killing nests is just going to be a personal choice if you've got the time. It's the preventative measures and learning to live with it is, yeah.
I think realistically, looking at what I've read today, most of us, the best we could possibly hope to achieve is putting the guard around front of each of your hives.
Yep.
Which could be a wire mesh or what you should call it, Moselier. Moselier, there you go.
I think it's muzzle. It's called a muzzle.
Yeah, a muzzle trap. And is to put one on each of those on the hive, and have two of these.
Yeah.
And take them out in the spring.
And really, these things are the only things you're going to dent them enough that your bees can coexist in some fashion. Yeah, because that's where they come in and out. Interestingly, the one thing Andrew Durham did say was hornets are attracted to your apiary by scent. He was suggesting you use solid floors. Open floors, the whole of that scent is getting blown all the way around. So he was saying that you need to consider seriously going back to solid floors so that you've only got your hive entrance.
To add to your proposed policy, would it be a successful idea to add in some kind of publicity campaign to make the public more aware?
Absolutely, yeah. We did quite a significant publicity campaign last week. We were probably in about 10 newspapers, loads of the online stuff. We was on the radio. Yeah.
I printed off from the non-native
that's their website. There's like 2 pages of A4. I printed that off at the beginning of the week before I even thought about any of this. And I put it on our village notice board with an A4 picture of one of them, because in the other thing they're not really good. So
we actually have we have the laminates every year, and 500 printed and give them out for the garden centres.
Yeah, and we need to educate everyone in how to set a little bait trap up. So, and I'm not scaremongering, I'm genuinely not. But the regional bee inspector rang me today to just let me know what had happened in Hull, because they found a nest. Yesterday afternoon, they haven't found a nest, but they've found a hornet. well, it's a site there. I think it might be one, but they've had one coming out. Yeah, they think they've got a nest in the docks areas but yesterday afternoon, someone rang me from Grimsby. He said, "Oh, I've just been watching the news, I think we've seen one of these things on all my apples." And Paul just happened to tell me that one of his bee friends down in Kent had said you're more likely to see them on windfall apples than anything. And so I said, "Oh, well, it's probably a European hornet, don't worry, but I'll send you the." So he's like, "It was really weird, you know, we were watching it really quite close up." So I said, "Oh, well," and he explained it to me. I said, "Oh, I think it's a European hornet, but I'll send you some photos tonight." And I forgot last night. And then the bee inspector rang me and I thought, "Shit, I didn't send that guy them photos." So I emailed him the photos and I sent him 2 photos of the European hornet, 2 photos of the Asian hornet. And I got an email straight away back saying, "Oh yes, it's the Asian type." Now I don't know if it is. It probably isn't. But but again, we got someone straight out. So someone's actually gone and set some bait stations in his garden, and the beekeeper I speak to happened to be like a mile and a half from where he lives. So she's putting some out, and you know, anyway. So eventually down to control measures and getting as many members on board. What I'd like to do is, in order to bulk purchase them, get individual districts to buy them on behalf of the members. So any members that we can get interested, put the name down, give money to the district, and then we can just put an order in for a bulk purchase of these things. These are just exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know.
What do you bait that with?
Interesting question. So if you're catching spring queens, then they're probably feeding themselves up. So probably like the Satira type. There's one you can make with sugar and jam and a bit of yeast. There's a recipe that I emailed this lady this afternoon who was going to set the bait station up, and I reckon that works just as well as commercial things. There's any enough, but at certain times of year you might want to put a protein bait in there rather than sweet. So if they're hunting your hives, some of the French, they reckon in the French markets, some of the French market towns, he said on that talk, they're getting driven out of the markets because they're coming in for the fruit, but they're also coming to like the fish counter because it's protein. They're after protein.
I was reading an article about them, and they were saying prawn.
Yeah.
Is one of the best
attractants
to them, and they can
protein.
sell them from half a mile away.
Yeah.
In Spain, they're flying out the fishermen and they can shrimp.
Yeah. Yeah. So you may bear. These are all things that, you know, this has all happened so quickly, to be honest, but these are all things that we've got to develop. Yeah. No. It's 11 kilograms of insects every year. Well, if you think of 550,000 nests in France and you times that by 11 kilograms, it's an ecological nightmare, really. Good question. They asked Andrew Durham the question and he wasn't entirely sure. They have a different type of honeybee as well. I think in any, yeah, they do reckon, and he mentioned this on his talk, didn't he, that evolution is an amazing thing, and they are seeing, even after 5 years of being predated on, honeybees are changing their behavior slightly. I suppose they're multiplying every generation, aren't they? So I think it's evolution also works, isn't it? The colony that survives by doing something are the ones that then somehow breeds that trait. They're everywhere in Europe. I mean, they're up in Belgium and the Netherlands and stuff like that. I think, well, we're only finding out because we're the northern outpost, aren't we? Wasps. I mean, they're so resilient. Honestly, they're so resilient. I think it's just down to the colder the winter, the less queens will survive. So if you're in the Scottish Lowlands as opposed to Kent, you're probably going to get a lot less than Kent. Have you been to Scotland in the summer? Is everything? Yeah. We don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm really not. It's we're speculating, aren't we? And really, I'm thinking we need an Asian Hornet team, ideally in each district. And that's not just to maybe hunt a few hornets in the early days. It's to help educate people and encourage beginner beekeepers to get there's a whole lot of things that we need to think about, and I haven't thought about them all yet, so I don't know.
Is there actually taking steps to encourage them because they're about the only insect.
Well, they said in Jersey that the only thing the Asian hornet, and I have heard a couple of people say it, but they definitely said, I didn't see it, but they definitely said in Jersey, the only thing that the Asian hornets were fearful of was a European hornet. So if a European hornet came to the bait station, the Asians would fly off. Yeah. I don't know how you instigate a breeding program for European hornets, but you also mess with ecology, don't you, when you do things unnaturally? Yeah. Andrew Durham did say that in some areas of France where there's really bad Asian hornet numbers, they were seeing more hawking of hives by European hornets. And he put that down to there being less insects for the European hornets.
Any big governments getting involved or anything like that? Or is it, anybody higher up the ladder with loads of money, and if it was oil that was worried about getting involved,
yeah, I don't know. So in conclusion, I think it's inevitable that they're coming. I think we have to assume they're coming. I think we need to be prepared. I think it's really important to blunt them at the start of the incursion into our area. That's going to be better for all of us. And I think Asian hornet control should now be seen as regular beekeeping practice. Very, very important beekeeping practice. Districts and associations need to work together. Yeah, probably going to have to work together like we haven't worked together before. On our own, if we don't act as a district or as an association or as associations together, if it's just beekeeping is a very solitary thing, isn't it? Some of us don't come to the meetings, some of us do, some of us forget to do a varroa treatment, it's a very solitary thing. But I think unless we actually do something together, I think if it comes and we don't actually do something together, then I think we're stuffed. So I think on our own, on an ad hoc basis, I think we really are in trouble. That's my thoughts. That's it.
I'll just say, Stuart, for those that haven't seen two presentations by Andrew Durham,
it's an essential watch.
Got to watch it.
Yeah.
The information made me gasp.
And he's the oracle, isn't he? He kind of knows everything. It's fantastic.
This has been softened by the fact I've watched all that.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that, you need to watch it and see it. It's been presented very well. Yes. Yeah. He's from Cambridge, LBKA, or BKA.
Yeah.
Yes, the Zoom meetings on YouTube.
Stuart, thank you ever so much.
No worries.
Tonight. It's been fascinating and in equal measures, I think. Big thank you to Donia on the techie front.
Did it work?
Yes, we have been
Well done.
broadcast. So, and thank you all for coming and go and spread the word.
Very good.
Thanks, Stuart.